Hello everyone. Today I'd like to talk about painting in the second grade. Painting in the second grade is a wonderful balance to many of the other activities, especially the artistic activities that we do as part of the weekly schedule in the Waldorf School. Second grade painting is an opportunity for non-representational work with color. And so whereas in the drawings that they might be doing in main lesson books with block crayons and stick crayons, or in sculpture activities, or in form drawing, they're working at representational work in which their picture shows something that they are imagining or have heard about. In a drawing, it may be to try and create a scene from a story. In a sculpture, it might be to create an accurate representation of the gesture of an animal or character or object. And in form drawing, it's making all of that movement take its form in a precise and carefully crafted drawing. In each of these, this representational work in which the mark on the page really truly tries to be a picture of something in the world or in their imagination becomes also an effort in trying to, as accurately as possible, mirror and reflect back the work of the teacher. Painting in the second grade balances those opportunities. When we're painting in the second grade, we want the students to experience what Rudolf Steiner called a living movement of the colors. This living movement, the way that the colors can move across a white page or blend and swirl with one another, is an opportunity for the experience itself to be something that lives far beyond what the painting will be once it's dried. In fact, many of my students have actually commented that when they see their painting later, after it's dried, that somehow it's not quite as beautiful. It doesn't have the same qualities as it did when they were working on it. And yet, done in the right way, while working in a painting lesson, even while the whole class is really wrapped in attention, you can get a feeling of complete golden silence when the painting lecture is structured well and led well. So with that in mind, keeping in mind that painting can be this experience of balance, it is why I choose in second grade to create no representational paintings. No paintings that are a painting of something. We don't paint a pumpkin or a person. We save all of that for the third grade. Now, if you've already gone into that realm in the first grade, it's awfully hard to go back, but it is possible. I recommend that you really think carefully about how you'll start your lesson and how you'll react when students ask, what is it a painting of? If you haven't done any of those paintings, if you've really kept to the archetypal forms of colors in the first grade, then this movement into 3-color painting or 4-color painting as an abstract medium will be a pretty fluid translation for your class. So the other really important part of painting in the second grade is that the students are building specific techniques, painting techniques that they'll be using in later grades, but can be built in a way that right now have very little implication. If they make a mistake, it's all right. Whereas in a 7th or 8th grade painting, a mistake in watercolor may mean that you need to start that project again. That has a very different response with a second grader than it does with an older student. And so introducing these techniques, giving them a chance to work with them in their own ways, but in a way that the painting isn't supposed to wind up having a final product, gives them the freedom and courage to be able to try those techniques out with very little implication for that. The other opportunity for painting in the second grade is to really build up a process that you want the students to use. And this, I find, is one of the most important overall goals of the second grade, which is to build individual responsibility for the processes that the students take and a feeling that they know what these processes are. And so every painting class, in my class, followed the same format every single time. We would come into class, the students would all wait at their desks, and they would know that I was waiting for them to be waiting quietly. And when a whole row was waiting quietly, I would ask them to start getting materials. Now this did a few things. One, it made every child responsible for their own presence, but it also made them collectively responsible. They had to know that if they were the one talking, it also might mean that their friends had to wait a little bit longer. A really nice way to build a sense of group responsibility. I never let it go too long, but just that moment of waiting for a second grader can be really powerful. They knew then that once I called a row, they would begin to come and get their supplies, and they would gather on their own from where I had set them on the table all of the supplies that they needed except for their paper. They would get a painting board, a painting cloth, a sponge, a cup of water, a set of paints, and a brush. I would, in the meantime, be putting all of the painting papers into water to soak. For wet-on-wet watercolor paintings, I found that the amount of time it took me to do a demonstration in class was just about the right amount of time for the paper to soak, about 10 minutes or so. For reference, at our school we use a Canson cold press heavyweight paper that we cut into 4 sheets. I find that it's a little bit more sturdy than some of the watercolor papers sold by, for example, Mercurius, and for that reason I like the way that it holds up a little bit better. But I've had success in all different areas, and different types of paintings work really well. We do use wet, pre-mixed watercolor paints, so the pigment has been mixed and poured into containers, and I like to keep those in these pre-mixed sets. This is a set that I use with my 3rd grade class, so it's same wooden container, same pots of paint, only in the second grade I would only use 3 colors. I did introduce a 4th color later. I introduced, my 3 colors are a carmine red, a lemon yellow, and an ultramarine blue at the beginning of the year. I did introduce Prussian blue later in the year for a few different purposes. One, it has a different feeling and works really well in the winter time. Also, I wanted the students to be able to distinguish between different types of blue, to know which one is cool and which one is warm, to know that one is Prussian and one is cobalt, starting to build that vocabulary for color that I think is really important for them to have as a reference for the world. So once they had had those materials and everything was set up, they would wait again quietly, and then I would begin to call them to the table. I would have set up at the table my own set of supplies, and once they came, they could find a place to quietly stand, but they knew that they were expected to wait quietly. And occasionally I would send someone back to try again if they were talking at the demonstration table, just to try and build up that sense that this was a special moment to watch, and that I really wanted their experience to be focused on them watching the painting rather than on whatever was going on around them with their friends. Once the whole class was there, then I would begin with the demonstration painting. I went through the entire demonstration painting, and before any of them would work on their own. I never painted with my class in 2nd grade. I again saved that for a 3rd grade experience. Now, when I was giving the demonstration, the paintings in the 2nd grade took the form of a color story. This was similar to what I had built up in the 1st grade of telling stories about how the colors came to be, only in the 2nd grade, those colors really started to take on their own characters. So lively yellow was a frequent visitor in our classroom. Shy blue or quiet blue were 2 different characters, the same color, but they had 2 different characteristics. By giving some of these personality traits to the colors, it allowed the students to really live into the colors as a gesture. It also allowed me to use those color stories to work with social issues that might be going on with the class. And so many of the stories that I told took something that had happened with the students and worked through it in colors in a way that started often with some kind of challenge or conflict, and worked out in some kind of compromise and cooperation by the end of the painting. By telling these stories over and over, week after week, by creating characters that the students could really associate with, who went through experiences of conflict and worked towards cooperation, I was helping to create a mirror for what they were going through in their 2nd year change, or in their 2nd grade changes. And so this offered an opportunity to indirectly meet some of those social needs that they were having. So once I had worked through that story, created this beautiful painting, some talked a little bit about the techniques as I was going, then I would invite them to go back to their desks, and once I saw that they were ready, I would bring them a piece of paper, and they could start and work through the painting at their own pace. This allowed me an opportunity to circulate through the classroom, make comments. Some of my comments would be very specific. If there was a student, for example, who had really struggled with the technique, I would often notice one very particular area and comment on something like, "That is a beautiful green that you're developing there." In one case with one of my students in that class, he, several weeks later, raised his hand and couldn't wait for me to get over there. And he said, "Mr. Gannon, can you see? I found the green again." And it was the most beautiful thing for a child who previously had really not shown very much interest in visual arts activity to have really found an appreciation. Giving your children that kind of sense that you see and appreciate the work that they're doing, that you see the beauty in their efforts, allows them to see it too. It's something we can model very powerfully. So that's the process that I would use for setting up a painting class. It helps to create that structure and autonomy. I'll take you through a demonstration of a painting that I might do with a second grade class, something about midway through the year, and I hope you'll enjoy. And now we would be ready to paint. A few notes on supplies first. I like to use a plastic painting board, although the wooden ones work just as well. I do like to use natural sponges for clearing off the paper, and the students would know that we're pretty careful. The sponges work best if they're dipped in water first and then squeezed all the way out. And then the sponge is used to go left to right across the paper to remove the excess water from soaking. This is again great eye tracking. The more left to right, top to bottom activity you can do with your second grade class, the better you are doing in service of their eye muscle development. So bringing that carefully down, they learn pretty quickly that if they don't get their sponge wet first and squeeze it out, that it leaves lines, scratch marks across the page. This is a really good way for a second grader to learn because they don't show up until later on the painting, and you have that chance to ask them if they were careful to follow directions. But learning to be careful and follow those directions is a wonderful thing for them to learn through this process because, again, there's no real outcome that they're looking for, and they'll make another painting the next week if it doesn't work out this week. I also like to teach my class to always paint with a painting cloth in hand. You'll see that I use that to always clean off my brush after it goes into the water, but the painting cloth is never used to remove paint. I'll show you a technique for that just a little bit later. So I like to also use a 1-inch wide flat, this is a Daniel Smith Aquarelle brush. I did use the rounded brushes that have a rounded ferrule and a rounded tip in the first grade. And so getting these flat brushes was a real privilege in the second grade. They were very excited about it. And using these flat brushes does also allow you to introduce some new painting techniques that I think are really helpful to introduce in the second grade and that benefit them as they go into the later grades. So after the students have their papers, after everyone's got their paper and is at their desk, then they would be ready to open their pigments. And in second grade, I worked with 3 colors most of the time, as I mentioned. I like to work with pre-mixed paints, and I would mix them at least a day in advance so that they would have a chance to have some of the pigment settle in the page. This does a couple of things, but primarily what it does is it allows them to work at the technique of choosing how much pigment they might use. So I'll talk about that in the example and let you hear how a color story with some techniques might work in the second grade. So, on this day, as the fall leaves had already mostly fallen and the cold winds were in the air, it was Lively Yellow who arrived first. Lively Yellow was still a little tired, but was so glad to get to school to see what would be happening. All of the fun games that they had been playing were such a nice thing, but Lively Yellow could even sometimes remember all that time that they had spent apart, and was so excited to have the chance to play games with their friends that Lively Yellow got to the playground before anyone else did and ran to every corner, checking on the playground equipment, looking for the pile of beautiful stones that they had collected the previous week, and looking here and there, of course, watching to see who else might arrive. Lively Yellow was most interested in what kind of games people might be playing, and so while there were no other second graders around, Lively Yellow spent a good amount of time watching the upper grade students as they played their games, wondering what the rules were and how they could be a part of it when they grew up. Well, as Lively Yellow was watching those upper grade students trying to figure out all of the rules to their games and enjoying the loud noises, Quiet Blue arrived to school. Now, Quiet Blue had had a harder morning. Quiet Blue really hadn't wanted to get out of bed. All of that cold air outside. Quiet Blue could hear the howling of the wind outside. And not only that, they were tired. They really just wanted to have a nice, quiet lie-in. Then, when Quiet Blue got up, they found that their breakfast was already partway cold, and truly no one likes slightly cold oatmeal, but least of all, Quiet Blue. Now, as Quiet Blue made their way around the playground, they were finding that they were waking up a little bit, and they were starting to notice that there on the other side of the playground, over by the upper grades kids, was Lively Yellow. So Quiet Blue thought about what their parents had told them about gathering their strength and having fun with their friends, and Quiet Blue worked their way over near where the upper grades kids were, and so quiet that the upper graders couldn't hear them. Quiet Blue said, "Lively Yellow, how are you today?" Well, amidst all of the lively shouting and the games being played, Lively Yellow didn't say a word. Quiet Blue hung their head and walked off to the other side of the playground, finding a quiet place near a nice bush that would have been even nicer had it had a few more leaves, or nicer still if they had brought a nice warm treat to eat while they were sitting beneath it. But as it was, they sat down and listened to the wind and wondered what this day would still have going on. Right about that time, as Quiet Blue was sitting underneath that bush and Lively Yellow was watching the game, along came Rambunctious Red. Red ran out onto the playground, eager to see what was going on. Less interested, of course, in what kind of games were being played, Red ran over and said, "Hi, Yellow, how's it going?" And before Yellow could even have a chance to answer, Red was gone. Now, running along beside them, Yellow chased after them, saying, "Red, Red, I figured out the game they're playing." But Red, you remember, is a quick one and always interested in something else, and before you knew it, Red had left Lively Yellow behind in the dust. Now, Lively Yellow turned back and started watching those games again and thinking about what kind of games they would play with Rambunctious Red when Red might return. But Red, meanwhile, had made their way over to where Quiet Blue was sitting. Red said, "Hi, Blue, how's it going today?" Blue said, "Oh, not so well." Red said, "Oh, come on, it can't be all as bad as that. You want to go play?" Blue said, "I suppose I can. I'm glad you want to play with me." And Red, sensing that something was going on, said, "What do you mean?" Blue said, "Well, when I got here earlier, I tried to play with Lively Yellow, but Yellow didn't really want to play with me." "Really?" said Rambunctious Red. "That doesn't seem like Yellow. Yellow usually likes to play with just about anyone. They really like having friends to play with. Let's go check in with them." So Rambunctious Red ran over to Yellow while Blue trailed behind. Red ran to Yellow and said, "Yellow, is it true? Were you really ignoring Quiet Blue? That's not a very kind thing to do if you were." Yellow said, "What do you mean? I wasn't ignoring Quiet Blue." Now, do you see, second grade, this time when I go back in to the yellow, I'll dip my brush all the way to the bottom of the pigment to get that really nice yellow pigment on the brush. I brush my brush off against the side of the paint jar, and then I can add in a stronger yellow right in here to really let Yellow start to think about what it was that happened. And as Yellow remembered back, they said, "I don't even remember seeing Blue this morning. Are you really sure that was me?" Yellow thought long and hard, wondering what might have happened. Now, did you see, second grade, that here I left a little too much water on my brush and it spilled into the red? I think it's kind of beautiful, but I will be more careful in the future to get a little bit more of the extra water off in the paint jars before I add it in. For now, I'll go ahead and mix those together because I like the way they're playing together. Now, as Yellow thought through it, they started to think maybe Blue had said something and they hadn't noticed. Yellow said, I was so caught up in the games that the upper grades kids were playing, I might not have even noticed. Red said, Yellow, you know you can't do that. You need to be aware of the people around you. Blue can be careful, or Blue's always careful of your thoughts. If you were to say something to Blue, you know that they would be listening. Yellow said, yes. Blue's a really good listener and a good friend as well. I'm sorry if I hurt their feelings. Red said, doesn't seem like I'm the one to tell. Yellow laughed and made their way over. Blue said, hello, Yellow. And Yellow said, Blue, I'm so sorry if I ignored you earlier. I didn't mean to. I was just so caught up in the games that were being played. Do you know the rules to the upper graders' games? Blue said, no. And as lively Yellow began to explain what the rules of the game were, Blue said, Yellow, I know that you didn't mean to, but it did hurt my feelings. I'm sorry that I didn't make myself more clear, but I hope in the future that you will let me know when things are going on. Red said, I'm glad that the two of you could work things out, but can we find something to play now? The three of them laughed and ran off together to find a place to play. Now they found that where it was much fun for Yellow and Red to chase each other, and a great time when Blue and Yellow could share their ideas for new games, the most fun of all came when the three of them could play together. Now you'll see here that I am second graders, that I am now working on bringing in to strengthen a little bit of the areas of the color where it's still very vague. So I've gone to the bottom of that blue paint jar, really gotten some pigment, and then I can bring that in a few places to add some more depth. I want there to be a little bit of a stronger blue through here. As Blue started to wake up, I thought it was important that they had a little more in the game today. So I'll bring some of that blue in, finding a few places, but now that I've touched my blue into that yellow, of course, now I need to be really careful. I can't put that into any red, and I can't put that into where red has mixed with any other color. I can let it find this green, and I could even let it develop into a deeper green here. Or I could use it someplace like this, where blue and yellow come together, so that those colors can really mix. But I need to be careful, turning the brush here and there, so I could use it to make a fine line, but I don't want it to get into any of that red because that would really start to form some of that brown that we're really working to avoid. Now I have to be careful and turn the brush. I'm getting pretty close there because I wanted there to be a close spot. But you can see when I want to go into a place like this, I turn the brush sideways to make almost a line. And as it comes out, I can turn it to use the wider side to help fill some spaces or blend colors together. I don't want there to be any gaps at the edge of my paper, so I'm being careful. I can brush it right off the side if I need to. And then with a nice clean brush, always making sure to get the extra water off, extra water onto the cloth, I'd like to go back through, and anywhere I see these hard edges, while the paper is still fairly wet, I want a chance to blend those colors together. So making sure that I'm blending each of my places. Now I'm working on places where red and blue come together. I can bring a little blue into the red to bring out a little bit more of the violet or the purple. I can bring a little red into the blue. But here, I have to be careful. There's a little yellow there, so I don't want that to mix in or I'll wind up with some brown. But everywhere where the red and blue meet, as much as possible, I want to blend those together. And I like using that figure 8 stroke that we've been working with, where it really blends them together, lets them swirl and brings out that purple. Bringing out those other colors makes these paintings so much more alive. So I'm trying to find a place where I can find that purple. I like that purple, but I'd like it to be even a little bit stronger. So I'm going to bring in some more blue. This will allow me to find some more color in that one. And I'm liking where most of these are blended. I see a few hard edges showing up, so I'm using a clean brush really carefully because all three colors were pretty close there. I'll use that clean brush here where there are some hard edges still, letting them. So I'm really trying to find all of those places. I'm looking at this and seeing that I have a nice, fairly pure red, but I'd like that to come back in with a really nice, intense red color, some pigment. A few places where it hasn't gone into other colors. I can see that there are some places of real yellow pigment here in the center. I'd really like to get a nicer green. And so I'm going to work on bringing a little bit more blue pigment over here, I believe. I like this area for green. Whoa, and now I brought in such a strong blue pigment. I'm going to have to really work with that. By bringing that in together, I'm going to have my work cut out for me now, but I think if I spread it out a little, if it's too much pigment, then it won't really want to create a green. But I don't want to lose that yellow. It was such a nice pigment in the center. So a really clean brush, especially after so much pigment in it. Now I'm going to have to go all the way into the pigment for yellow. Let's see if we can find these colors moving together, finding a nice green, bringing it down here a little bit so that it can mix and have some of this lighter area in the back so that the green can really shine. If I bring that green over all of the blue, it likely will not show up very well. It'll start to really get dark, but I think if I've left it just right, I can get a nice dark green out of that. Now you can see, of course, that there are places where the colors are flowing together here, and that's all right for now, but I'll let it just soak into the paper a little bit more before working to blend them. You can also see where I'm starting to get this mountaintop ridge across my page, so I will correct for that. And I'm lifting my paper really carefully and carefully bringing it down. Now, if you do that second grade, you might notice I had some places here I have to attend to. I didn't want them to go into all mixing together. Now, that's about where I might take a demonstration in the late fall for second grade. I do want to show you another technique that I would bring usually somewhere in the winter with second grade, which is to talk about lifting colors. If you haven't done this already with your class, it's a great technique to learn where at some point in a story I would have a reason where they might need to take something back, perhaps taking back unkind words or taking back something that they did that they weren't happy about, something that the character wanted that they did but didn't want to remain. And then in the story, along with that, I would have made a nice mark and I would talk about how, for example, in this case, maybe Quiet Blue gets angry and says something unkind, and then wants to be able to take that back. Now, in the story, I might talk about it in a different way, but then I would say, well, with a nice clean brush, with a heart that's clear and a clear thinking, to carefully lift that word out, clearing their mind again, making the apology, clearing their mind again. So each time I'm cleaning the brush and then I'm wiping it off in my cloth. So they're learning to control the amount of water in their brush, also learning to be really careful about each stroke being an intentional act. All of this is kind of building on where in first grade, there might be a lot of pretty quick painting or not so much care into each stroke. In the second grade, you want them to start to think about where each stroke goes. And further, to be able to do something like this, where they're taking a color out. In this kind of non-representational painting, there's nothing to go wrong. And so if they take something out and it doesn't work, it's all right, but it's almost a certainty that every child somewhere later in the grades will make a mistake in a painting that they will want to be able to erase. And it can be pretty difficult. Watercolor can be an unforgiving medium. And so by teaching them a technique like lifting off color, it gives them a technique that they can use in the future when they really need it. And many third grader or second graders are really grateful to learn it. Third graders are grateful to be able to use it, and upper grade students even more so. So that's the kind of painting that I might do with a second grade class, and the kind of story that I might tell to work with it. So I hope that this was helpful to you, and I look forward to any questions that you might have. Have a great day.